everybody. This is Sally Ember, EDD, on Changes, Google Plus Hangout on Air, live today, October 22nd, 2014, on the YouTube platform and on the Google Events page. Please come and visit. Please comment. I actually got the comments tracker to work, thanks to Michael Daniels, because we have a fabulous guest today. I want to introduce Charles E. Yallowitz, and he's going to tell you about himself in a minute. And I want to thank everybody who's visiting now or in the future, and I hope you will write a question for Charles or me and interact. So Charles, tell us about yourself. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Charles Yallowitz. I'm the author behind the the fantasy series Legends of Windmere. I've got the first 5 books published, and I run the website under the same name. So yeah, that's pretty much my job. I'm so big into fantasy, and I'm actually very happy to be here. I'll admit, a little nervous. This is my first video interview. So.
Well, that's great. You have a lot in common with people who've been on this with me. I think I have had probably out of my 9 episodes, at least 7 of you have been on a Hangout for the first time with me.
Huh. I think it's a fairly new thing. I haven't really heard of it before, like doing stuff like this. And I've heard of podcasts, but this is very interesting, though. It's very high-tech. And
well, I think it's fantastic because it allows people to interact. It allows people to put up questions. And one of your friends actually put up a question for you. And I'm going to let that be the first question that we post today. It's from a mutual acquaintance on WordPress, John Howell. And he asks you, remembering back for as long as you can, what was the first thing you actually wrote in the fantasy genre? And if you have a blurb, either in your mind or written down, let's hear it.
Okay, the first thing, I don't know if this would count, but in 2nd grade, I was always writing books, and I decided to try and write a fantasy book. It was a combination of fantasy and King Kong. It was just a little, again, I was 7, so it was just a little book where a bunch of people went to an island to find a rainbow-jeweled monkey, and they ran into this big gorilla, they ran away from it, and they were going through all these traps, and I made it for a friend's birthday because I couldn't afford a real present. And that was my first attempt at writing anything fiction. And I think it is kind of fantasy because I remember there was magic getting thrown even though no one was a wizard. So, again, mind of a 7-year-old. So that was the first foray into it, I would say.
Well, I think that's so interesting because then another person wrote a similar question as a follow-up on your own website. This is from Jack Flacco, and he wants to know, when did you know you wanted to be a writer? And is that all you expected to be? So let's hear your answers to those, because if you started at 7, it sounds like you knew at a pretty young age.
Yeah, I dabbled in 7. Like, it was in 2nd grade. There were stations in my classroom. There was math, reading, writing, and art. And I fell in love with the writing one. But it also meant that I was trying to hide under the table and avoid the math one, so I was kind of redirected towards math and science for a few years because I was trying to get away from them. It wasn't until high school that I decided I actually wanted to be a career author. And that's when I started creating my first fantasy world. I was into comics, so I tried to write a series on immortal superheroes that lived in space. And I actually self-published the first book called Immortal Wars: Summoning, which I try not to direct people to it because it's very amateur, but that was my first attempt at publishing. As far as, is it what I expected? No, not in any way. I really thought I would be writing, editing, and then I didn't realize how much extra work would go on as far as promotions and even just how difficult it was just to keep continuity and everything going with my series. And Legends of Windmere is going to be 15 books. I've already outlined everything, and I'm finding it that I have to go back to read my own stuff before every new book, at least glancing through, because I've messed up hair colors and eye colors at times. So.
You know, that's a really common problem, and what I've had to do, I have a similar situation where I'm writing a science fiction series, the Spanners series, that is going to be 10 books. Right now I've completed and published 2 ebooks, and I'm working on the 3rd and 4th. I had to start a spreadsheet, a characters list, a vocabulary list, an acronyms list. all the special skills in the PSI, the Psi school. I had to make a whole hierarchy of the skills. I have spreadsheets that have spreadsheets. And if I didn't do that, I would be completely lost.
Yeah. I have, at least for most of my books, I have notebooks that I have like character profiles. The ones for Legend of Windmere, since I started that in college, they're not as in-depth as what I have now. So the characters are very fluid, but it does give me something to reference, so I keep at least the physical stuff going. Powers, I seem to have a little bit of a problem with some characters, namely Nyx, the spellcaster, with very few limits. So I can kind of get away with getting her to do various things that she couldn't do before just by throwing magic at it, and it seems to work for her. So I got to probably fine-tune that one a little bit as the series progresses so she's not too overpowered. Okay. I think we got our first little freeze. Okay. I guess I'll take a moment to show the first of my covers because I promised my cover artist, who is a let's see if I can get this right. This is my first book, and my cover artist is named Jason Pedersen. He's my wife's cousin. So I do want to actually give him big thanks because I wouldn't be here as far as I wouldn't have gotten as far as I have gotten without him doing the cover art. So for any authors out there, I would say really thank your cover artist and really give them credit, not just in the book, but publicly thank them, because I've run into a few people that haven't actually, they don't treat their cover artists with respect. Some readers are always getting me to push Jason to work quicker and stuff. And you rush a cover artist, you get a bad cover. So that's something I actually told a lot of authors, that the cover is what people see first. So you shouldn't rush it. You should be thankful to everybody that helps you, because that will become the face of your book. So, and I did promise him I'd mention it if I had a chance. So this would be my chance. But I'll show you my favorite cover of his book too. This is the character Nyx that I mentioned, and definitely my favorite cover out of the series so far. So, hello?
I'm back. Sorry, Charles.
No problem. I was showing cover art and saying, treat your cover artist nice.
Oh, good. Did you get to say his name, too?
Yep, I said Jason's name because I was pointing out that some people, especially early on, were telling me to really push Jason and get him to get the stuff out quickly, and that gets that'll get you sloppy work. So a lot of authors have to do that when they're starting out as indie authors. They should learn, treat your cover artists with respect. Don't rush them, because that's the face of your book. So.
That is a really good point, and I want to take this moment to give a shout out to my cover artist, Idonna Willow Raven, who's been doing my logo and my cover art, and also to thank Rain Dowell for giving me the help with my logo for the Changes HOA that you see with the butterfly and with my name. I had chosen a different way to do it, and she improved it enormously. So I really appreciate people that have graphic art talent, because I really don't. And the best thing I can do is take other people's work occasionally and use it.
I don't even try to draw.
So when you create your cover art, how do you work with Jason? Do you tell him what you want, or does he read the book and come up with it on his own?
What we were originally going to have it with him reading the book and coming up with something, and then doing this grand scene. But he's very busy with his real job. He does tattoo art out in Arizona, and so he couldn't really get around to reading the book. So what we did was I gave him detailed descriptions of the characters, what they do, some things that happen in the book to them, anything that really connects to them, and then he draws something up. We've decided to have that each cover is going to highlight a different character. Like the first one has Luke Kalendor, second one has Nyx and Sari, Timuron Wrath, and the most recent one has one of the villains, the Lich. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of the villains get on the cover too. Because 15 books and only 6 main heroes, I'm going to run out pretty quickly.
That's interesting. I took a different approach, and I worked with my cover artists. I to create the covers for my 2 books, which you can see on my website and on Amazon. And I wanted people to get a good sense of what the aliens look like because they're very unusual and hard to visualize, I think. So I work with her extensively to create each of the 5 aliens, and then I work with her to create the main character, Clara Brannon. So all 6 of those are on the first cover. And then once she created those, she said it was easy to reposition them or reformat them to put on future covers. So for the second cover, I keep 2 of the aliens, or 3 of them actually, and Clara, and then I add 1 new character, her nephew, Moran Ackerman, who is the lead person who is helping to fight the people on Earth that are rejecting the aliens' help and don't want to be a member of the Many Worlds Collective. So there's a young man on the cover with her, and they're doing levitation. So that's the second cover. Now the third cover hasn't been developed yet. Everything I've sent her, she's rejected. She says it's too complicated. It doesn't work on a small thumbnail. There's too much going on. I've got to be more selective. And I just haven't been able to think of what I want that says what I wanted to say enough that she thinks is going to make good art. And I trust her. If she says it doesn't work, I believe her. So I'm not going to argue with her, but it's really frustrating because I'm not good at thinking about it, and she hasn't read my book, so she doesn't know what to tell me.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I'm having a challenge with my 6th one, with the 6th one right now. The character's been mostly human on the cover, and the current one is, I'm trying not to say the character's name, but everybody's going to figure it out. It's not a human character, it's a creature, and I think right now everybody's just like knows what it is. And so it's not going the same way. He's having a little trouble visualizing it, which, it makes sense. This is a character that I've described him and people have told me that I'm wrong. So I'm like,
is this a character from mythology that you're using, or did you create it?
Okay, I might as well just say the character. It's a Fizzle the Tiny Dragon.
Oh yeah.
And people love this character, and I've been waiting to get him on a cover. He plays a big role in book 6, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what Jason does. But that's the challenge. He's not like a big fearsome dragon like people are used to. He's cute. Doesn't have leather wings. He has dragonfly wings. So it's not as easy to do as far as dragons that most people are used to. At least that's what I'm gathering. But I sent him extra information, so he's working on it. That's the best thing. I mean, I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to release it. I'm hoping before Christmas, but I don't put on exact deadlines anymore because I never know what's going to happen.
Well, that's a really good point. A lot of us that are on our own schedule try to come up with a schedule we can give our fans and our readers so they'll know what to expect, but life intervenes, things happen, and other people who work with publishers or cover artists know that other things can intervene beyond our control as well. So you do your best to say when something will be released, and then it's released when it's ready.
Yeah. You just can't rush it.
Let's go back to talking about characters, because I really have this question to ask you, and it's because I've read part of your first book, and I was really struck by the different dysfunctions in so many of your characters. So I was wondering, when we create characters, there are all these ways we can create them. We can base them on actual people and then diverge. We can just create them out of our own imagination, or we can base them on composites. Or I was thinking we could create characters based on astrology characteristics, or the DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychopathology, like for villains especially. Or we could use personality Myers-Briggs typologies, or the Enneagram, or all kinds of other ways to vary and show the characteristics of the people we create. What do you do to create your characters?
Well, with the character bio, I usually have a personality profile, just saying, like, any flaws, any phobias, any obsessions. I took some psychology classes in college to help with getting an idea of how to make characters. But the odd thing with Legends of Windmere is it's based off a Dungeons and Dragons game, so these characters were played by other people, most of them. Like I was Luke Calendor for about 2.5 years. We once or twice a week we'd get together and I'd basically put on the form of Luke Calendor. My wife is the one that played Nyx, and that's why you also see some characters like having to leave abruptly or suddenly. Not leave abruptly, but some characters, like the player left the game, and that left me with trying to figure out what to do. But it isn't easy. The best example is Aiden Carwin, this half-elven priest. He didn't have any personality in the game, so I had to create it. And so I just I let the characters play off each other using test scenes before I write the actual book. So I see how they interact in various situations like combat or just arguing, see which one gets a temper, which one seems to be very mellow. And it's weird. I people watch, so that's probably another thing that it comes from. I guess I let it flow is the best way. It sounds like a cop-out answer, but I just kind of let the characters take form as they run into events. I have that basic idea, and that's pretty much what I bounce off of, and it always surprises me what these characters do. I'll say that.
That's interesting. So when you say they came from a Dungeons and Dragons game, that still means that whoever plays the game would put their own spin on those characters, right?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, you have when you're playing the game, you have to actually put a personality behind them, but you can also take the way of just being there and just being there for the dice rolls and the combat, and to not really play the character. And it's an interesting hobby where you can be a person that plays the game as if it's just a game, or play the character and throw some acting into it. So
they have these live action role play games.
Yeah, I was in that for a vampire for for a little while. Those are interesting. Those are very interesting.
And those are different than when people go to Comic-Con or to some other fan convention and dress up as the characters just for that.
Yeah. I think with Comic-Con you're dressed as a character that was made by somebody else, and you can act like them and all that stuff. But in a live action role playing game, you're actually it's the character you designed. Your character will evolve as you play the game. You choose what abilities they have. So.
Well, the other difference in a live-action role-play game is that there's something happening. You're not just prancing around in a costume. There's actually a story that you're involved in, right?
Yeah. And like I said, I did Vampire. That has a very high body count at times, so characters can get killed off pretty easily. So that was one of the things that I didn't like about it. I'm not a big fan of games where they're trying to kill your characters very easily, because I'm like, I put work into this. I like character development, as you'll see in the story. I love the ups and downs of character personalities, putting them through bad situations and seeing how they come out. So being a fantasy author right now, everybody kind of wants a fantasy book to have a very high count thanks to Game of Thrones. So I don't really do that. I do kill characters, but not to the same extent, because in my mind, once a character is dead, you can't do much with them. That's pretty much it. That's the end. You can bring them back as a ghost, you can bring them back as a zombie, but their story is pretty much over. So
but you've got necrocasters and other people, right, that can revive the dead. Well, if you're a Windermere reader, Charles has given you this great opportunity. When does it end, Charles?
I'm going to have it up for a couple weeks, probably till mid-November, and it's a list of all main characters and the villains, some of the supporting characters, and the top 6 will be getting excerpts posted at the end of the last week in November. I'm going to try my best to be spoiler-free, but some of them might come from the upcoming book 6. I even have books 7 and 8 written, so I can take some unedited stuff out of there if I want, depending on which characters get taken. So any
of you want to go to legendsofwindermere.com and put your vote in to what you believe should be the best character to win this award of favorite character. You can go there between now and the middle of November. I went on and I voted for the character I like. But I have to say, I want to talk to you about the role of anger in your stories because, like I said, I've only read the first probably third of your first book, but I am struck by how much anger is exhibited by so many of your characters from the very start. And what is that about?
I don't know. I'm actually starting to realize it now. I mean, I think there's a lot of tension with the characters. I mean, a lot of them in the first book, like Selenia and her staff at the school, they're all like former mercenaries, so they're very stern. And unfortunately, Luke Callender is a character that he's not the most mature, even though he's like one of the main heroes, and so he sets people off a lot. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain it, but he definitely sets people off, and brings out their anger. But the best example actually of temper is Nyx, because she's got a short fuse. But that's also something that I do like, having a character start as angry, so I can slowly mellow them or show why they're so angry. But I don't know. I actually just realized during my last read through that so many characters are just very got like an answer in the back of my head. Oh, yeah, I think because I personally don't like keeping emotions like built up, so my characters will do the same thing that I probably would. If they're annoyed, they'll say it. If they're angry, they'll say it. If they're sad, they'll say it. So a lot of stuff just kind of comes spewing out, and it tends to be anger for some reason, at least in the first book.
Well, I think Rain is agreeing with you, and I want to just show her comment. Thanks for being here, Rain, and participating. That she does think it's more interesting to follow a character through a series, and I think what you're talking about that does make that interesting is the character arc, ARC, which is showing all the different circumstances and events and interactions that create changes in your character temporarily or as a progression, as a maturity, or whatever reasons that you have for changes. Sometimes there's injury or illness or loss or reward, whatever it is, victories that can create these changes in the characters, and that is fun and interesting for readers to see how they change.
And I think it's more realistic too, because a real person won't always just be going up. It'll be up, down, and stable for a little while, and then something happens. So, I mean, if you're doing a series, I think you have to factor in that life will not always be easy, it won't always be hard, and the characters won't always be the same. So, that can help to carry through a very long series.
Right, and I think the complexity factor is often what people are drawn to, so that you have what's considered to be a heroic character, but they have flaws. Or you have a villainous character, but they have little moments of empathy or poignancy, or they love their own child, or whatever it is.
Yeah, I love putting like flaws, or in villains' cases, I guess merits or positive stuff in them. In the series, I actually only have one villain that's totally irredeemable. Even the main villain somehow developed this weird benevolence and kindness that I didn't see coming. I always expected him to be just the pure evil, and he's not. So that's actually changed how I write him now. And I've done some really odd things with him in the few scenes that he has that I never would have thought of back when I first designed him. So.
Interesting. Well, that brings up another question, which is, I know you're writing the series Legends of Windermere that you've said is based on characters from Dungeons & Dragons, but you've also written some novellas. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, I mean, I've used the novellas are just like smaller works, and I've kind of used those to experiment with other genres that I was curious about. I mean, the three I have out, there's a Bestiary of Blatherhorn Vale, which is it's a collection of fantasy poems. Each poem is about a weird creature. It was originally going to be something that I did as a children's book, but my friend who helped me write it and was going to do the illustrations, he had to bow out. So I just turned it into a poetry book because I didn't feel like getting another illustrator because he helped me so much. I tried slasher horror with a book called Catalysts. That was an experiment. I couldn't really get it down right. And the last one I did is called The Hope Teller, and and I tried to do a combination of fairy tales and a dystopian or a post-apocalyptic journal. It's about this. That's actually my favorite one that I wrote out of those three. This guy's on Earth with other humans that survived these alien invasion, and he's explaining how the world works. But for the beginning of a chapter, in the second half, he's telling a fairy tale to the other survivors to keep hope alive, or to talk about something else that just happened. So I see novellas as something that I can experiment with and try to develop other genres that I might be curious about, or that I can even pull into my own stuff. Because just because I write fantasy doesn't mean I can't put a horror element into some of it. So the novella helps me kind of do a little test run.
Well, it seems to me like what you've done with your poetry collection is create an incredible opportunity to invite young people or adults to be the illustrators and to create a second version and have a contest or have a competition of some kind and have people submit their drawings for your poetry, and then you can highlight them on your blog or end up including them in a future volume. That would be awesome.
I actually did. I tried that when the book first came out, but no one actually took to the contest. I had no volunteers. So I might try it again.
It might be one of those things once you develop more of a following for Windermere that people are crossing over and wanting to participate. You might even start it with having people try out. Say you're having problems having your illustrator create Fizzle. How do your fans see Fizzle? Okay, well, if they like drawing Fizzle, would they like to draw some of these creatures from your bestiary? And then you could have this crossover. I mean, I know there are lots of sites with young people where they're really interested. In fact, I was just collecting some of these. There's one called, let's see, it's called youngwriterssociety.com, and there's one with teen writers that's on Matali Perkins, M-I-T-A-L-I Perkins.com. And both of those invite teen writers, and I'm wondering if they also might invite teen illustrators.
Huh.
So we'll put a call out to that if anybody's interested in talking to you about that. What's the best way to reach you?
The best way to reach me is usually through my blog or through my author Facebook page. The blog is legendsofwindmere.com, one word, and my author Facebook page is just Charles E. Yallowitz. So, I mean, I'll admit most of my stuff is through the blog. So.
Okay, so when people are trying to reach you, then they can talk to you about your books, your novellas, your illustrations, your covers, your characters, take your character poll, do all kinds of interactive things with you, including buy your books. Now, how are you doing with the whole idea? We were talking earlier before in our green room time about audiences, and I have issues with people about what is an appropriate young adult genre book. So middle grade versus young adult versus new adult versus straight adult. Where do you weigh in on all that, Charles?
Where do I weigh in? It's really weird because I don't remember these things when I was, reading all this stuff when I was a kid. I would find something that looked interesting and I'd read it. Page length and what was in it didn't really factor in. So I'm still not. I always have trouble explaining what my books are, and people are always asking me what it. I would say young adult, definitely you have to be careful with what you put in there. And that's the only thing I could think of with that one, because new adult you can definitely get away with a little bit more because they're older. I can't even get people to explain what the actual age categories are on that. I've had people say young adult is 10 to 13 and new adult is 13 to 18, but then I have people say that young adult is 13 to 15 and then 16 to 18 is new adult. So I can't. So I think it's still. I think both genres are kind of finding themselves right now. So,
Well, and I think that it does get blurry. And my statement that I've made on other hangouts and in my blog is that I think people underestimate the variety of things that middle grade and young adult readers want to read. And I don't think it's true that they only want to see their own age group characters as the protagonists or that only have themselves as the heroes or whatever you want to call it. I think they're interested in a variety of books and stories. There might not be any young people in a story, and they still might want to read it.
well, that's actually a good point. I mean, I'm thinking now about I read comic books a lot, and one of the big things that happened a couple years ago is they got rid of Spider-Man being married, which was something I always liked as a kid, that there's a superhero that's married. And I heard one of the reasons was because him being married was kids couldn't relate to that for some reason. So I do think that a lot of people for some reason think that young adults and teenagers in general can only relate to characters that are single, interested in, like, just interested in people of the opposite sex, and are rebellious. Like, you see the same character types throughout everything. My characters range from, let's see, Luke's about 19, Suri, who shows up in book 3, is 18. She's the youngest. But I never really thought of gearing them towards a YA audience. The ages just happen that way. It shouldn't. Let's say it this way. It shouldn't really be about the age of the character when you're directing to the audience. It should be about just the depth of the character. Are they a good person? Are they a bad person? What do they do in the face of something that a young adult might even run into? That should probably be the bigger focus than if they can, if they both be carded walking into a bar. So.
Right. Well, that is a great segue to another topic I wanted to bring up with you and some of my other guests in the future, which is, what is the role of women in speculative fiction? How is it changing? How has it been changed? What do we want to see in the future? And I noticed that there are a lot more female protagonists and female villains and females in general being depicted, but I also noticed that they're still very stereotypical, and if they're drawn in any illustrative way, they have teeny tiny waists and very big breasts, and all that kind of ridiculous comic book exaggeration. So where do you come into that when you create your female characters, and what would you like to say about that?
When I create them, I do try to make them realistic. I mean, I can't say anything too much. I mean, I've got a curvy gypsy as one of my main heroes later, but then on the other hand, I have Nyx. Yeah. It's funny how you mentioned comic books, because that's where a lot of this seems to be coming from, because the comic book heroine has always been barely clothed, curves everywhere, and because that medium was usually aimed at young boys. And I think since now you're getting more women into the audience, you're going to see a slower change, but you're still going to see those old things still around. And
well, there are a lot of comic books and graphic novels now written by women, written for women, with women characters that aren't stereotypes. They don't get nearly as much airplay. They don't always get made into movies, but they exist all around the world, especially in Japan. And I think that manga and anime are really starting to bring in much more variety of female characters than America has. What do you think about that?
I do. I watch a lot of anime and read a lot of manga, and I think they actually have. I like how they do female characters a little bit better than Americans right now. American comics. I mean, I still like Wonder Woman, which is one of the few American heroines that you can really think of if you're put on the spot. But Japanese definitely have an interesting take on it. I'm thinking of one series called Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I watch a lot, and the three main characters are two women and a boy. The boy is weak, he cries, he's emotional, and one of the girls is the more emotional. She's not as emotional. She gets emotional later on, but you can see that they're more. I think it makes them more human, because it shouldn't be the girl is always the emotional one and the boy is always the serious one, and that's what gets switched up a lot in anime and manga.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point, which is that there are a lot of variations in the way they're depicting the characters, but I would have to poke a little hole in what you just said about emotionality being weak and that being a feminine characteristic. I would just discard all of that and say no, no, slash, big X, no.
Yeah.
Because emotionality can be an actual empowerment point, can be the source of some character's power. Sometimes for psi skills, especially, if you're robotic, you don't have any energy. You have to bring in your passion of whatever that is. Sometimes you have to use your fear, or you have to use your anger, or you have to use your loss, your feeling of intense grief, and that powers the person, motivates them, but also powers their physical and other characteristics, right?
Yeah, no, and I agree. I probably said it wrong. It is weird how, for some reason, a lot of people see any sign of emotion that isn't like pure courage is weak, and that's something I like you. I don't agree with it. I really think there shouldn't be so much judgment on any emotion shown by a character, because you can. They're all every emotion is necessary. You know, I've gotten in my own books. Some people got annoyed that Luke was crying after one of his friends is killed in book 2. He's a male character crying. They say, "Oh, why is your hero such a wuss?" I'm like, but nobody had any problem with Nick's crying. But on the same level, you know, it's definitely interesting how both genders seem to have some expectations as far as emotion shown or not shown. And I think as an author, you should just kind of ignore those ideas and just go with what feels right for that character.
And then we have wiseacres who come onto the show with comments like this from Nicholas Rossi's, my guest from a couple of weeks ago, who wants to be obnoxious and get put up into my comments by saying Wonder Woman's most impressive superpower is being able to squeeze into her suit. Nicholas, you are now on my bad list. You are banned from commenting until you apologize. That is absolutely unacceptable.
Superman's suit is pretty much painted on, and all he has is the neck to go through. Come on.
Well, that's really true. Superman's is just as glue. So is Spider-Man's. I mean, really, they all have these skin-tight spandex things going on. Well, I have a little bit of a compadre, I should say a comadre here with Rain Dowell, who agreed with some of the points I brought up in putting up my big X when you were talking about emotionality as being weak or being feminized. And I really liked the way you came back after that, Charles. I have to admire that. Some people would just shrivel up and be like, oh my God, Sally just attacked me, I have to go. But no, you didn't. You really came right back out and said, I got something to say here. So thank you. I appreciate that. This is a conversation, not an attack.
Yeah. Like I said, I do kind of. I've gotten into the debates before, and I really always say that any character should be allowed to show any emotion. And I think I get more annoyed when somebody gets on my case about a male character crying than anything with the female characters, because I just don't understand that one. And I know we're talking about like feminine characters, but I'm always scared that people are more accepting of female characters having the entire range of emotions, while male characters are not being allowed to get that same range right now.
Well, I think it's really interesting when you then talk about fantastical characters or beasts or aliens or some that aren't gendered or certainly aren't human, like Fizzle or any of the leaks or whatever else you've created, and the ones I have in my books, the aliens, or the ones that are the mythological characters that are half animal, half human, or half whatever they are. Those all have unique characteristics that aren't based on anything, right?
Yeah, those are pretty much their own thing.
But they do get gendered in ways that we might not be that aware of if we're not paying attention.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how monsters in fantasy get gendered at times, too. Because I've read some books where if it was an angry creature, like a good example, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, I have never heard of him using a female orc, ever, or a female dwarf. I don't think those show up. Those are the gruff, angrier ones. But you see female elves, the pretty ones, and I think in fantasy that's still kind of done where you don't see the female versions of the rougher, more monstrous species, but the pretty ones you do see it, and that's something that I think should actually be changed.
Well, it kind of begs the question: how do they reproduce?
Yeah, that I've always wondered that. So, yeah, I didn't even. I have the female versions in my books and stuff, and I kind of went off the wall with the orcs because they're weird. I made them a weird Beauty and the Beast species for some reason. Like the women are more like Nordic Valkyries, prettier than the female elves, and the males are the standard like ugly, brutish ones. But they're not. I made the orcs that they're not actually They're not evil creatures. They're just creatures, or they're about as civilized as the elves. And that was another thing I tried to do with my series that kind of throws me off when I'm reading a book, that things like goblins, orcs, the monsters are they're always put in monsters. Like there's no other choice for them in fantasy. That you can't have them be somewhat civilized or even be a hero. So I'm
well, I think you're bringing up another aspect of fantasy which is never talked about that I've ever heard, which is the social caste or the class basis for the hierarchies of these characters. And I would be really interested in somebody, and probably there are people who have written about this, but I haven't read it, where you look at the real analytical literary criticism and say, what is an orc in the caste system? What is a lich? What is a dragon? What is, in your bestiary, there are the higher status and lower status, just like there are with usually money or property with humans.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah. It just kind of, I think it comes a lot from just stemming directly from Tolkien. Everybody kind of just uses what he did, and no one's really, it hasn't been changed much since that time.
Well, I'm giving it a big thumbs down.
Yeah.
And I want there to be more analysis and more thought and more creativity and more divergence.
Oh, yeah. And it'll open up a whole bunch of new character types for people to use also. I mean, having a heroic orc would be something fairly new, or at least, it's probably been done once or twice, but in fantasy you rarely see an ugly hero.
Well, that's another point. What are the characteristics that create what we consider handsomeness or beauty, and how class-based and culturally based and racially and ethnically biased are those?
Yeah.
Why is blonde more beautiful than dark hair? Why are certain features considered more handsome? Why are certain physiques? It's all arbitrary. And over the course of decades or centuries, those keep changing.
Yeah, I have to admit, I never really thought of it too much. I just kind of went along with what I felt I should do. But...
Oh, well, Nicholas has redeemed himself, so I'm going to let his comment come up. He says there was a role-playing game with female orcs that had a funny subplot, and you were trying to help them mate, if his memory serves. He can't remember which one it was, though. Does anybody know?
Oh, God. That sounds vaguely familiar.
Well, I never played role-playing games, so I can't help with that. But if anybody listening now or in the future can remember that, you can contact Nicholas Rosses, or you can leave a comment here, and I'll shoot it over to him. Commenting on YouTube will work. Starting in a few minutes, we're going to be, unfortunately, at the end of our hour, and therefore this will be archived on YouTube and available for however long YouTube keeps things. So anyone who missed it or missed part of it, please go watch on YouTube, and the URLs for that are in this stream and on my website, and they'll be on Charles's website after this is over, and please let people know about that. And since we're almost at the end, we have about 15 more minutes. It's hard to believe, Charles, but here we are. Went by like nothing, right? So yeah. I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about what's coming up for you, what you want people to know about, what you are planning.
Oh, right now, there isn't much going on. I have to admit, because I should say I'm also the stay-at-home parent, so I can't do like appearances that easily. But I'm right now working on getting the sixth book out, hopefully by Christmas. It depends on how things go with cover art, how things go with the editing. But I'm hoping before Christmas I'll have the next book of Legends of Windmere out. So, and that's the big thing I'm pushing right now. So I mean, and I'm always on my blog, ready. Like I'm always posting stuff to get discussions going, or posting about things that led to Legends of Windmere, or even future projects that I'm working on, just to get feedback or let people know what's going on. Because I have over 30 series or one-shot ideas that all take place after Legends of Windmere, or chronologically probably before. So I've got a lot on my plate.
Do you do interactive writing or crowd creating, was what I call it, or anything like that on Wattpad or Jukepop or any of those sites?
I was on Wattpad for a little bit, but I wasn't getting much in the way of feedback. And I have to admit, I'm so busy working on my own stuff that I find it hard to interact with other things. So, which is something I have to work on. But
okay, so find you on your website, which is legendsofwindermere.com.
Yep.
And find you on Google Plus or Facebook. Which one are you more active?
I'm more active on Facebook.
Okay. And that's under your own name, Charles Yallowitz?
Charles E. Yallowitz. Charles Yallowitz. I'm under both. One's an author page and one's my regular one. I'm also on Twitter. So.
And on Twitter as C. Yall, right?
Yeah, C. Yallowitz.
Okay, good. Well, I want everybody to know that I'm also very interested in fantasy, science fiction, and speculative fiction authors coming on my show, and I've had some great ones so far. This is episode 9, but I have some openings. So any of you that know anyone that you'd like to hear from, you could recommend them to me or send them the information and let them watch an episode. Anyone who's interested in coming on the show, you can watch an episode and then email me at sallyember@yahoo.com. If you go on my website, sallyember.com, you can see the schedule and see the open slots and pick one or two that might work for you. It's most Wednesdays. And John Howell has another comment up here for you to see. John is a big fan of yours, obviously, and he wants to say that he likes the way you involve your blog readers in your projects. Thank you, John, for being here.
I always appreciate the feedback. So.
And we're getting to that point in my show where I always ask our guests the big question.
Okay.
So here it goes. Given the local, personal, regional, national, global, environmental, political, social, and any other kind of changes you're aware of in your own life or in the larger world or in the world of writing, what would you like to speak to? What are your feelings, thoughts, fears, wishes about changes right now, Charles?
Changes. Well, for one thing, change is inevitable. I mean, everything changes. And we discussed characters changing and stories change, but even in real life, everything is fluid. So that's something that I think a lot of people have to learn about, especially if you're going to be an author, because the industry right now seems to be changing. I'm an indie author, so I don't know exactly what's going on with traditional publishers, but prices are changing for what they're doing. People are paying more attention to indie authors. There are new things coming up every day of how to promote your book or what people are looking for, and you just have to find a way to adapt to it and go with it. You can stick to your guns as much as you can, but you do have to be adaptable to changes in just about anything. And I'm going to stick to publishing and writing more because that's what I'm more interested in, to be honest. And I get into a lot of conversations with people that say, they're not liking where the industry is going. But your choice in that is to either drop out or to find a way to fit yourself in there. So it's definitely, this year especially has been really weird, is the best way to put it. I've seen so many indie authors change their system or even change genres, because you never know what's going to be popular, one month and what's going to fall out of favor. Again, I write fantasy. Right now it's Game of Thrones is the big thing. Anything like Game of Thrones is popular. But before that, with the Lord of the Rings movies, it was anything that was like adventure based, like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. And again, that's a change in the genre, and you have to either roll with it or find a way to keep doing what you're doing. I said I write things closer to Lord of the Rings than Game of Thrones, so I might not be adapting the best, but I'm also sticking to what's me. So again, I do feel like I'm kind of rambling
we have
here.
some fans here. Nicholas says he agrees with John that he really likes the way you communicate through your blog.
Yeah, I'm definitely better at communicating on that than verbally, because, like I said, my mind's going a mile a minute hoping I'm making sense of what I'm saying, where I guess this is what I'm trying to just sum up with is change is inevitable. You have to stay true to yourself while adapting so you don't kind of get left behind or knocked out entirely, especially when you're an indie author, because it's not exactly highly competitive as much as people say, but you could be your own worst enemy in this business. I've seen so many authors kind of just do something that was just so ridiculous and they couldn't come back from it. And
well, I think you bring up something that really is a big change in the publication world, which is that authors have a much more direct line to our readers and readers to us through the internet than has ever existed before. I don't know if you remember, and it probably is still true for a lot of the very popular big publishing house authors, you have to go through an agent, you have to go through the publisher to reach them. Whereas for us, you and I and Nicholas and John and lots of other authors here, we're available. We're on Hangouts. We're on our website. We're in Facebook. We're on Google+. You can email us. You can talk to us. You can harangue us and troll us and attack us.
It's a double-edged sword. It definitely is.
It is, but then we have a lot more power, as you said, in the way that we present our work and what our work is and how true to it we want to be. We don't have somebody telling us, oh, well, you have too many orcs in that, or we want the women to wear tighter clothes. You don't have to listen to anybody.
No. And I think that's might be where things are going towards more, that authors are going to have to be more approachable and human, at least when they're starting out, because we can't all be the big author that's making a world and that's pretty much all you know us as. So if we present ourselves as people might be, fans might be more interested in following us throughout a series or interacting with us. And that, I think, is definitely the biggest change that I've seen since I started. And it gets more and more difficult every day, especially when you write a series, because I'm at a point where I can't say that much without releasing spoilers. I mean, there's one secret that shows up in book 3 that I have actually never mentioned on my blog. I've managed to keep it under wraps entirely. So, and that's probably the only thing I've managed to pull off on that one.
You're not going to give a tiny little hint in our HOA so only the HOA viewers will know?
There's no way for me to give a little hint on this one. It's just, it's really difficult to explain. I'll say it involves Luke. It involves Luke Calendar and something that happens to him and the big change that happens to him in
Okay, so now I'm going to just throw out ridiculous things. He's transgendered. He's really an alien. He's got 2 heads. He's really himself and his own father and his own grandfather from multiple timelines.
The funny thing is, the 3rd book is where his father and grandfather show up.
Well, I really appreciate that you don't give away too much because you want people to read your books, and I understand that. And I think that when you have a lot of fans who are following through a series, they're excited and they want to know what's coming, but you can't give them too much or they'll feel gypped out of reading it or betrayed by your giving too much away.
I do try to say, like, if somebody does say, oh, this character dies, yeah, it's upsetting to find that out, but just knowing that a character dies doesn't change. You still should read how it happens, because it'll still have some impact.
Look at Nicholas, though. Nicholas really wants you to talk. He says, spill the beans, dude.
No, no, this one's staying secret for as long as it can. It's going to come out at some point, but it kind of has to be. I can't keep it going for too long, especially because it means that, unfortunately, this little secret means I can rarely do scenes that have Luke from certain books because it just comes up all the time. The only clue I'll give, it deals with his new abilities and powers that he gets.
Ah, well, you allude to those way back in the first book when the villain is talking about those.
Yeah, and this kind of went in an interesting direction. It didn't go in the direction I even expected after the third book because the power's still evolving. Luke did something that in the upcoming book, upcoming book is going to be very interesting because it brings Luke back into the main spotlight for Darth Vader's father. Okay.
Yeah, I'm very sorry, but Nicholas is now revealing the truth. Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Yes,
Different Luke, Nicholas.
classic
Pay
Star Wars.
attention.
I actually had somebody tell me that I had to change Luke Calendar's first name because Luke Skywalker existed.
Yeah, you're not allowed to use any first names that have ever been used. Well, then we
Yeah.
would run out of names very fast.
Yeah.
But we only have a few minutes left, so I want to remind people they can reach you at legendsofwindermere.com, Charles E. Yallowitz at Facebook, or Charles Yallowitz on Twitter and on Google+, and that you have novellas as well as your Windermere series and your poetry and your bestiary, right?
Yep. Poetry.
And I also want to remind people that if you are a parent and you want to talk about being a stay-at-home author / parent, Charles is your guy, because that is his life right now. He's got a 5-year-old, and that is the deal. So any of you parent bloggers out there who are writing about whatever it is you're doing at home, this is what Charles is doing. He's creating entire worlds and fantasy foundations and characters out of his head, and then that's how we get to benefit from his being at home. I am available at sallyember.com. I'm also on Twitter as SallyEmberEDD, and on This Changes HOA. And please come and visit it on YouTube. If you missed most of this, you can watch all of this and the previous 8 episodes, in which Nicholas Ross's is one, and many others coming up. If you would like to be on the show, please go to sallyember.com/changes, watch an episode, email me, and tell me what Wednesday you'd like to be on. I am loving this experience with you, Charles, of interacting about fantasy. I want to thank you for being on the show. Do you have any last things you'd like to say?
No, well, thank you. This was a lot of fun. This is my first time doing it, and it was a great experience. So I'll say if anybody
you can let all the other people know that are nervous that it wasn't horrible.
No, it was fun. Just ease into it, and it's fun. I'd recommend everybody try it. So, sign up.
And Rain Doll is now saying that she really wants to know what Luke's secret is. So what do you say to Rain?
You have to read through book 3. That's all I can say.
This is a good way to get readers, and I think that's important. Keep reading. Keep telling people about the books. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nicholas and Rain and John and Sheila and Michael and anybody else that's watching who didn't comment, who's going to watch later and is going to leave a comment on YouTube. We'll catch you. Leave a comment on Charles's website or mine. Tell your friends. Tell everybody you know who's an author or a reader that this is a great way to get to meet us and hear whatever we want to talk about. And if you have a topic or a question, the best way for us to talk about it is put it in the comments. Thanks again, Charles, for being here and being so open.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Well, you are most welcome, and we are going to sign off here in a minute. I want to leave everybody with the final statement I make to everyone at the end of our Changes Hangout, which is, go well, do well, good luck with your changes. Signing off right now. Bye-bye.